Hi, and welcome to my interactive presentation. Today I'm going to be discussing a more equitable feedback model. In this presentation, we'll investigate historically common feedback, as well as terms like standard English and the white listening ear. We'll then pivot to think about re-educating our teacher ears and do some practice scenarios, and I'll explore some next steps. The objective of this presentation is to just raise awareness in the faculty body at MMFS surrounding the historic roots and contemporary issues of feedback in a multilingual classroom. It's my hope that teachers gain a new perspective on the assessment of student communication skills, as well as provide some next steps for those who'd like to foster more equitable feedback models in their classrooms. And furthermore, I'd just like to celebrate the language practices of all students, especially those students whose language have been marginalized in the past. So a short activity to start. What does feedback look like or sound like in your classroom? So take a moment and jot down some ideas in the box on the right of this presentation. I hope you had a chance to jot down some great feedback models. These might not have been on your list. So these are some historically common feedback models in the classroom. And I'm going to pause the video here for you to take a look at each scene. Now, if any of these feedback practices look or sound familiar, you're not alone. These are taken from life, from my classrooms and classrooms I've been in. So how might the prevalence of these forms of feedback impact our students who communicate in ways outside of what we call proper or standard English? Put it another way, how did we as teachers come to utilize most this linguistic prescriptivism in our feedback model? So linguistic prescriptivism is a set of ideologies which dictate that there is one correct way of using language, and it arbitrarily privileges particular linguistic practices while stigmatizing others. Now, this has a big impact on our language minoritized students. They can feel policed on account of their language practices. They can also contribute to their feelings of low self-esteem or self-consciousness around sounding smart or stupid based off of how they communicate with peers and teachers. Now, you might be wondering on how we teachers came to rely on grammar and syntax correction over other forms of feedback. So here are the simple answer is our society is built for it. So I wanted to explain two terms here. So teachers and the white listening ear. So this term refers to a white listening audience, like a white head teacher in a classroom, who hears and interprets the linguistic practices of language minoritized students and hears them as wrong or inappropriate. Now, opposed to what? Well, opposed to standard English. Now, standard English, or as Dr. April Baker Bell calls it, white mainstream English, centers white monolingual language practices as the rule, the way to speak in an academic setting. This contributes to anti-Black linguistic racism, as well as more broadly, ratio-linguistic ideologies. Now let's take a moment to read through each of these definitions. Not only do these ideologies and this linguistic racism lead to further traumatization of our students, but it also impacts how they see themselves. So let's take another look at these scenarios up above. How does each scene demonstrate the white listening ear or linguistic prescriptivism that reinforces the dominance of white mainstream monolingual English? Hopefully you discussed how correcting students' grammar or students recognizing and making assumptions about a way someone speaks, indicating a form of intelligence as ways in which this anti-Black linguistic racism or ratio-linguistic ideologies come about in our classrooms. All right, so Now that we've talked about some common, historically common feedback methodologies, let's talk about retraining our teacher ear. So these are a couple of ideologies that I have found to be really impactful in my own practice. So the first one is promoting translanguaging. What does it mean to translanguage? That's a wordy term. To translanguage is to simply use all of your languaging skills as if they are one language. In a translanguaging classroom, the students and the teacher work together to create an environment in which bilingual and multilingual students can leverage all of their language practices in order for everyone to teach and learn in deeply creative and critical ways. Another ideology or pedagogy that I found really helpful in retraining the teacher ear is adopting an anti-racist Black language pedagogy. So this is a pedagogy that must center Blackness, confront white linguistic and cultural hegemony, and contest anti-Blackness. I want to take a moment to talk about an anti-racist Black language pedagogy. So this is the work of Dr. April Baker Bell, and I have put at the top my number one frame, my favorite of her 10 framing ideas. And so here you see that an anti-racist Black language education and pedagogy acknowledges that Black language is connected to Black people's way of knowing, interpreting, resisting, and surviving in the world. And I think the key phrase there is a way of knowing. So by accessing and leveraging our Black language users in our classrooms, we're actually helping them access and share more of themselves in the classroom. And so I find that that was a really impactful quote and idea. Lastly, I'd like everyone to consider the ways in which language justice is social justice, which is a quote from April Baker Bell's work. And I hope that you might find ways to embrace more of our students' language repertoires and communication skills in order to help give them more presence in the classroom and center our Black language users in our classrooms. So let's put this theory into practice. We've now learned about different forms of historically common feedback, as well as ways to pivot towards a more equitable feedback model. So you're going to see a couple of scenarios. What I'd like you to do is read the scenario above, identify how this scene demonstrates anti-Black linguistic racism, and then reflect on how you would respond to the situation. Then record yourself addressing the class. How would you respond in this moment? So go ahead. Okay, hopefully you had a good discussion there. The next scenario, so read this second scenario and see how you can identify any issues that contribute to ratio-linguistic ideologies. Then record yourself responding to the student's comment. Okay, we're wrapping up this little discussion now. And so I just wanted to offer some next steps for those that were interested in creating a more equitable feedback practice in your classroom. Here are 3 activities you might consider. So you could discuss white monolingualism in the classroom. This might be in the form of books, teaching materials, signage, and other tools in your classroom, and thinking about what kinds of language practices they support as well as suppress. You could also get to know all of the different ways your students communicate by exploring their different ways of knowing, as April Baker Bell was talking about, and expressing their full languaging repertoires. This activity might look like a languaging self-portrait or autobiographical skit or dance. Finally, if you're interested in creating a classroom environment that focuses more on intellectual standards than prescriptive feedback, you might consider Paul and Elder's intellectual standards for critical thinking. These are standards like clarity and depth, fairness and significance over grammar and syntax. So that's it for my presentation today. Thanks for watching and interacting, and feel free to give me any feedback in the form of a note or audio recording, any questions you might have. So thank you so much.